Most people do one of two things when the topic of AI and jobs comes up. They either convince themselves they're fine, my work is creative, I deal with people, my industry is different, and they stop thinking about it. Or they spiral. They read one alarming headline, feel a wave of dread, and then do the only rational thing, close the tab and hope it works itself out. Neither of those is a strategy, and neither actually tells you anything true about your specific situation. Here's what I want to do in this video. I want to give you a framework, a small number of questions you can ask about your own work that will tell you, with more clarity than any article can, how much genuine risk you're actually facing. Not in general, not people in your field. You. And the answer might surprise you, in either direction. If you're somewhere between 18 and 35, working in a knowledge-based role, writing, analysis, design, research, coordination, customer work, legal, finance, code, anything that mostly happens on a screen, this is directly about your next decade, not your distant future. The next 5 to 10 years of how your career develops, what skills become valuable, and what kind of leverage you have in the labor market. The people who get this wrong in either direction pay a real cost. The ones who assume they're safe don't build the capabilities they need. The ones who spiral burn energy on anxiety instead of on the things that would actually help them. The goal here is accurate, not optimistic, not pessimistic. Accurate. There's a study that gets cited a lot. You may have seen the number. It's from a Goldman Sachs report from 2023, and it estimated that roughly 300 million jobs globally could be exposed to automation from AI. That number travels around the internet, doing a lot of damage, mostly because it sounds terrifying and tells you almost nothing useful. Exposed to automation doesn't mean we'll disappear. It means some portion of the tasks in that job could be performed by AI systems. But jobs aren't monoliths. They're bundles of tasks, and the question of whether your job is at risk depends entirely on which tasks it's made of, and what kind of tasks those are. Here's the distinction that matters, and almost nobody makes it clearly. The risk isn't about your job title. It's not about your industry. It's about the specific cognitive operations you perform at work, and whether those operations follow patterns that AI can learn, or whether they require something AI currently cannot do reliably. That's the frame. Let's build it out. I'm going to walk you through a framework with 4 questions. Each one sharpens the picture. By the end, you'll have a much clearer sense of where you actually stand. Step 1. Are your tasks pattern-based or judgment-based? This is the first cut. Pattern-based tasks are tasks where the right output follows reliably from the input. You learn the rules. You apply them. You get the answer. Summarizing a document. Categorizing data. Drafting a standard email response. Producing a first version of something based on a brief. AI is extremely good at these, not because it's intelligent, but because it's been trained on enormous amounts of human-generated patterns and can reproduce them with high consistency. Judgment-based tasks are different. These are situations where there's no established pattern that maps cleanly onto the problem. You're weighing competing considerations. You're deciding what's relevant. You're choosing between options that each have real trade-offs, and where the right answer depends on context that isn't fully specified anywhere. Think of a doctor deciding how aggressively to treat a patient given their full personal history, or a senior editor deciding which story angle will actually connect with an audience, or a founder deciding which market to enter. AI can inform those decisions. It can surface patterns from similar cases. But the judgment itself, the act of taking responsibility for a call under genuine uncertainty, that remains a human task. So the first question to ask about your own work: when I strip away everything routine, what's left? Are the remaining tasks things where someone experienced would say it depends on the situation? Or are they things where there's a known right answer you just need to execute? Step 2. How much of your value is in the output versus the process? This one catches people off guard. A lot of knowledge work is valued for its output, the deliverable, the report, the piece of code, the designed screen. If that's primarily where your value lives, then the fact that AI can produce a first version of that output very quickly changes your position significantly, not necessarily catastrophically. But the leverage shifts. A junior analyst whose primary contribution was producing clean, well-formatted research summaries is in a different position than they were 3 years ago. That's not doom. It's a real change in the value of that specific contribution. But some work is valued as much for the process as the output. A consultant isn't just selling a slide deck. They're selling the client relationship, the trust, the ability to navigate political dynamics inside an organization. A therapist isn't selling a list of coping strategies. They're providing an experience of being heard by another person. When the process itself carries value, and especially when that process involves a relationship, a social dynamic, a physical presence, or an accountability structure, stripping it to its output misses what people are actually paying for. So, in your work, what does your client, employer, or team actually value? The artifact, or the process of getting there? Step 3. How decomposable is your role? Here's where the task versus job distinction becomes critical. Some roles are highly decomposable, meaning you can break down almost everything the person does into a list of distinct subtasks, most of which are relatively self-contained and could theoretically be done independently. Data entry, proofreading, scheduling, generating standard reports, responding to templated inquiries. Each task is bounded. You can write an instruction set for it. Other roles are deeply integrated. The value comes from how different responsibilities connect, from holding context across many conversations, from sensing which problem is actually the important one, from adapting in real time to an evolving situation. A project manager who's actually good at their job isn't doing a list of discrete tasks. They're holding a mental model of every person's situation, reading interpersonal dynamics, knowing when to push and when to ease off, and making constant micro-judgments that don't get documented anywhere. That integration is hard to decompose. And what you can't decompose, you can't automate one piece at a time. So, can your role be described as a list of tasks, or does it require a continuously updated model of a complex, dynamic situation? Step 4. What's the cost of a mistake? This one is underappreciated. AI systems make errors. Not always, not on simple tasks, but on complex, ambiguous, high-stakes problems. They fail in ways that can be hard to detect in advance. In domains where the cost of an error is low and correctable, a draft email, a brainstorm, a quick summary, that's fine. Use the tool, check the output, move on. In domains where errors are expensive, irreversible, or dangerous, medical decisions, legal advice, structural engineering, financial planning for someone's retirement, the threshold for good enough rises dramatically. And the human in the loop, who holds expertise and accountability, doesn't disappear. They become more important as a check on a powerful but imperfect system. This is why high-stakes professional roles have been slower to automate historically. Not just because they're harder, but because the downside of getting it wrong is serious enough that humans want another human responsible. Ask yourself, in my work, what happens when something goes wrong? Who's accountable? How reversible is it? The higher the stakes and the lower the reversibility, the more human judgment remains structurally necessary. Now that you have the framework, here's what it looks like in practice. Imagine two people with the same job title, both mid-level marketing analysts at comparable companies. The first person spends most of their time producing dashboards, compiling reports from data sources, writing up standard campaign summaries, and answering recurring questions from the team with formats they've refined over time. High output value, highly decomposable, mostly pattern-based. Low cost of error, the reports get reviewed before they're acted on. When they run this framework honestly, they realize most of what they do every week could be handled by a well-configured AI system with some oversight. That's not comfortable, but it's true. and knowing it clearly means they can do something about it. The second person, with the same title, spends most of their time doing something different. They're embedded in a complex business. They know the stakeholders deeply. They're the one who gets pulled in when results don't make sense and someone needs to figure out why. Their output is harder to define. They're not just producing artifacts. They're providing interpretation, judgment, and accountability. Same job title, completely different exposure. You don't know which one you are until you ask the questions honestly. Think of your role as a stack. At the bottom of the stack are your most routine, most repeatable, most pattern-based tasks. At the top of the stack are your highest judgment, most context-dependent, most integration-heavy responsibilities. AI pressure always works from the bottom up. It will absorb the bottom of your stack first, and it will do it faster than most people expect. But it doesn't automatically reach the top. The practical question isn't, is my job safe? It's how tall is my stack, and am I actively building toward the top of it? A lot of people in knowledge work have spent their careers getting very efficient at the bottom of their stack, because that's where most of the volume was. That used to be fine. Now, that's precisely where pressure arrives first. The shift required isn't frantic upskilling across 10 tools. It's an honest look at where in your stack you actually spend your time, and a deliberate move toward the kinds of work where your judgment, your context, your accountability, and your relationships are the thing that makes the output valuable. That doesn't happen overnight, but it starts with an honest audit. So, can you know if your job is actually at risk? Yes, if you ask the right questions. Not what does my job title say, and not what does the latest report claim, but are my tasks pattern-based or judgment-based? Does my value live in the output or the process? Is my role decomposable or deeply integrated? And what's the actual cost when something goes wrong? Those 4 questions, applied honestly, will tell you more than any headline. Here's the insight compressed into one sentence. Your exposure to AI isn't determined by your job title. It's determined by the proportion of your work that lives at the bottom of your stack versus the top. Now, once you know where you stand, the question that follows is harder. How do you actually move up your stack on purpose? What does it mean to build toward higher judgment work when most of your day is already full? And what happens to the people in your organization who are stuck at the bottom, not because they're not capable, but because the structure of their role never gave them a path up? That's the next question, and it's worth thinking carefully about.